Who is this guy? Oh, yeah, there's his name. Yeah.
So for those of you here, if you can hear me online, it's Dr.
Retallack. There you go.
One of the top paleontologists here in Oregon. You can give what your current accolades of where you, I mean, you're Professor Emeritus.
That's right.
U of O.
Professor Emeritus.
What other title you have?
I am now apparently a digital creator, according to my Facebook page. I don't know who put that there, but
Paleo creator.
digital creator. Yes, yes, yes. Thank you, Aaron. That's really great. After all these lovely fossils, your heart is probably sinking, thinking, oh, he's going to talk about Precambrian, where the fossils are tiny and awful looking. And yeah, I'll get to them. There are some. What I mainly want to talk about is climate change and how we can approach climate change from the point of view of fossil soils, how we can understand how the world has worked in big climate perturbations, like this one, 700 million years ago, when the whole planet was pretty much under ice. I think this one is actually pretty accurate. Some people think it was a complete snowball, that there was no land at all. My studies of fossil soils in South Australia and a few other places in Death Valley suggest that this is actually about right. There was land and also probably a bit of an ocean in the middle. But why was this such an extreme cooling? Why did so much of the world freeze up? And I'm going to suggest to you there are several explanations. It has to do with the way in which carbon is pulled out of the atmosphere by organisms. And when there are major evolutionary advances in organisms, the world cools down. And I'll give you several examples of this, focused around this one, which is really the big one. Oops. Just press that button, right?
Probably because I press on the bottom. Let's get the mouse. It's the same thing.
Oh, press that.
So there we go.
Oh, very good. Very good. So now that we're post-COVID, I want to gloat a little bit. COVID was really lovely for me, by the way. We nerdy retiring types just love sequestering ourselves. And I got two wonderful books out of it. This is my textbook, third edition, 2019, which is a bit technical. But you might like this one here. How about this lovely soil? Isn't that lovely? It's all about a lot of the issues that I'll talk about today and more, how soil rules the planet and how weathering has created great climate perturbations. And that's my wife on our 10th wedding anniversary at the Adobe in Yachats many, many years ago. And one of the nicest pictures of a soil I have, and I particularly like how her jacket matches the seafoam flowers that are coming out of the soil itself. And that's, I thought that was pretty evocative. Well, snowball, it was actually discovered by a personal hero of mine, Sir Douglas Mawson, in about the 1920s or so. And he discovered them looking at these rocks in the Flinders Ranges, which are on a $100 note from Australia. As a handsome young man, he was also a part of the Australian Antarctic expedition of 1909 with another one of my heroes, Lieutenant William Edgeworth David. An ill-fated trip where they almost died, but they managed to get back. Not quite as ill-fated as the Scott expedition of 1913. He noticed some really interesting things about the geology of the Flinders Ranges, which is a hot state in the middle of Australia. We call it the outback. That were very similar to the glacial features that he found in Antarctica. And Edgeworth David made comparable discoveries in the Permian and Carboniferous of the Hunter Valley in New South Wales, Australia. But Mawson knew that these were much older than that. These were way back in the Precambrian. He knew they were below the earliest trilobites, basically. And people like Paul Hoffman here, looking very elegant, up against an outcrop in Namibia, have documented these glacial facies all over the world. Quite remarkable. The idea of snowball Earth was coined by Joe Kirschvink. And one of the key lines of evidence for snowball Earth was that some of the rocks associated with this big glacial episode, which we knew was Precambrian below the trilobites, were magnetized in such a way that the magnetic hematite was oriented parallel to bedding. This is a problem because we have ice caps today at high latitudes where the magnetic minerals will be oriented at a high angle to bedding. It's only in equatorial regions where the magnetic minerals are oriented parallel to bedding. And that suggests that the glaciers were in tropical regions. This is a big, big chill, a really big chill. And then all the different features they had, drop pebbles. This one is plopped out of probably an iceberg that melted into the sort of soft sediment below. These great chillites, these deformed beds with drop pebbles, another drop pebble here. A lot of glacial features in places where they shouldn't be, near the tropics in the late Precambrian. This is a study I did in Australia too, and I was really thrilled to see this because in addition to the glacial faces that have dropped pebbles, which indicates that it was probably an ocean with icebergs or something like that, and other places where there are tillites, which means that there were glaciers were just dropping their load, there were also places where you could see these ancient soil horizons like this, with these wedge-shaped deformations. We know what these are. These are sand wedges. These are periglacial soil features. This is a meter on the scale here, and there's a comparable scale through here. These are different soil horizons, and we know where these kinds of features form. They form in the dry valleys of Antarctica. So here we have a periglacial paleosol in near Adelaide, near one of the nice beaches there, Hallett Cove, that formed very low latitudes. Here's my reconstruction of it, the pattern ground, which would look like you're in a helicopter flying over the dry valleys, a big glacial stream, and then glaciated highlands in the background, which would be in the northern part of South Australia. So this is a vision of what the snowball would have looked like. Let's get it in a bigger context. Now, it's not entirely surprising that as you go further back in the fossil record, that things would be cool. And the reason is that we've known for a long time that when the sun turned on around about 4.5 billion years ago, it was not as bright as it is today. In fact, the sun has become 30% brighter through geological time, going through to the present. Now, this is not the sort of temperature that we see, though. We don't see the sort of temperature that you'd predict of minus 30 degrees centigrade or Celsius back then. We see from paleosols evidence that the temperature kind of oscillated backwards and forwards over a kind of a workable range. And we know that because we have sediments. We have glacial episodes. These bars are the glacial episodes when there were extensive glaciers. Gypsum and life doesn't flourish at more than 60 degrees centigrade, which is about 130 degrees Fahrenheit or so. So we know that something else is going on, probably greenhouse gases. And the main greenhouse gas, of course, is carbon dioxide, but there's also methane. And these have kept the world warm. And then what I'm going to try to, so that's the source of warming that keeps the planet habitable. What I'm going to try to persuade you this time is that life is in control of those gases. There are microbes, I won't talk too much about them, methanogens that create carbon dioxide. And then, of course, we, in combination with plants, are in this conspiracy to keep CO2 within habitable levels. Otherwise, both of us die. It has to happen. This kind of co-evolution, there's a balance which keeps the world habitable in terms of carbon consumption by trees and carbon breathing out by animals. So here are some ideas about how the snowball Earth came about. Why there wasn't a snowball Earth, and then there was. Why did that happen? Well, not only do trees and organisms consume carbon to make into their bodies, into their biomass, but weathering itself consumes carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide is dissolved in rain, and it makes a weak solution called carbonic acid. And that carbonic acid works on feldspars and other weatherable minerals to make clay. That consumes the carbon dioxide. So if you ramp up the weathering, then you will pull carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and you'll start to get a big chill. So Paul Hoffman's basic idea is that in these two glacial periods, this is the Marinoan one and this is the Sturtian one. I prefer to call this a Latiner and this one Sturt. There were so many continents in equatorial regions, unlike today when we have a lot of high latitude continental distribution, that weathering was intensified and that pulled carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. I don't find that all that convincing because, well, there's a scatter of them really, isn't there? They're not necessarily lined up around the equator. Something else I think is going on. Another idea is that there was a lot of large volcanic eruptions, and the idea is a lot of fresh volcanic eruptions of volcanic glasses in particular, but also basalts and cinder cones and other things, that might enhance silicate weathering and pull carbon dioxide. We really don't see evidence of that at all. This one's a little bit more interesting. This one is the idea that there may have been algal blooms. There were microbes, there were planktonic organisms, unicellular creatures in the ocean at this time, 720 million years ago. And if they really bloomed, they could pull carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and create a snowball Earth. I like that one, but I don't think it's the whole story because for the algal blooms, you need to feed it with stuff from the weathering on the land. You need to do something, you need to ramp up the weathering. And I don't think just latitude or volcanoes are going to do that. What's going to do it is new kinds of organisms. So if in a world where we had primarily microbial biomass, where we had mainly unicellular creatures, once we start getting bigger creatures like lichens and different sorts of protozoa, that would increase the carbon dioxide content of the soil respiration, and that would intensify weathering. That's the hypothesis that I prefer, and I'll try to show you some evidence for that. In two areas. One of them is one of my favorite spots right in the middle of Australia. This is really the outback, even more than rather civilized Adelaide. There is quite a thick sequence here, this measured section of the Johnny's Creek Formation, which has lots and lots of paleosols. It appears to be a loess deposit, which is interesting. Many of you are from the Midwest, and you know about loess, L-O-E-S-S, glacial dust. It's a really fertile material for soils. You can grow almost anything in it. It has a very characteristic grain size distribution in the silt range right here. This is the Johnny's Creek Formation here, and this is another loess deposit down by Adelaide of early Ediacaran age. This is Tonian age, about 720. This is Ediacaran, 635 million years ago. Loess was quite common associated with these glacial deposits, and that in itself would have made a relatively weatherable substrate. This is a pretty busy slide, but it's to show that we have lots of data. This is the sequence of the Johnny's Creek Formation, the Ariunga Formation. That's the snowball earth diamictites, the tillites, basically. These are all the paleosols of several different kinds, and the width of the bar is how well developed it is. These different kinds of paleosols are important for showing us different degrees of weathering. We can use alumina to bases ratio to look at that degree of weathering. We can also look at the changes in CO2 content from the paleosols and changes in productivity of the paleosols from the depth of weathering of salts in them. And there are two kinds of paleosols in this sequence. Here's one here, a nice one. See, there's the top of it. This is in a core. These are some of the cracks. Here are some of the nodules of calcium carbonate. This is pedogenic carbonate. And the depth from here to here gives you an idea of the productivity of that soil. There are these ones that have that have quite a bit of carbonate in them. That's this one here, which I gave Aboriginal names, Akagera. This is Alkinji, which is one that has gypsum nodules in it. So some of these have calcareous nodules, as you would get in Eastern Oregon, and others of them have gypsic nodules, as you would get in extreme deserts of Oregon and down in Death Valley. The chemical weathering trends are quite marked. There's clay toward the surface that's formed by weathering. There's a lot of silt. This whole band here is silt, and that reflects the lithicic parent material, which is basically glacial flour. We can do some chemical tricks. And we try to do that because we've got a bed, basically. We want to decide, is it just a bed or is it a paleosol? Well, if these relationships here, the depletion of these elements and the depletion in mass goes into this quadrant, that's really good evidence that we're looking at a paleosol. And also it quantifies the amount of weathering of that soil. We can also look at the relationship between the stable isotopes in the carbonate. In the calcareous soils, this is carbon 13 and oxygen 18. And the paleosols, like Ellery Creek here, they show a very strong relationship with one another. This is diagnostic of soils. This cloud, on the other hand, is what you get if you're looking at carbonate that forms in an ocean. So this is another diagnostic test that's telling us these are actual paleosols. They are not aquatic limestones. They're not aquatic carbonate. Here's some modern soils for comparison. Some soil crusts, which aren't very well correlated. Some altered limestone, not very. This is what marine rocks look like in the modern and in the Cambrian. And this is what a methane seep. We can use this as a diagnostic diagram to tell whether the nodules that we're seeing are pedogenic as they appear, or whether they are actually marine or even lacustrine. So this is a summary for that section. We're looking, I put ages on it here, 800 million through to 720. So we've got a good run of time, geologically speaking. And we can see quite a nice, although very slight and not quite significant, increase in soil productivity through time. And the big message here is that the gypsic paleosols are replaced largely by calcic paleosols. Now, we know what this is like in places like the Atacama Desert and in Death Valley, California. The calcid paleosols are more productive than the gypsid paleosols. So I've ticked these two. These agree with my hypothesis that something was going on in the soils so that they were getting more productive through time.
To clarify, you mean by productive, means they both in thickness faster?
Yes. So the productivity measure here is the soil carbon dioxide, the soil respiration. So a more productive soil is one which has a higher soil respiration. So the standing soil respiration in a desert soil is about 1,000 to 2,000 ppm. The standing CO2 in a rainforest soil is about 100,000 ppm. So we're ramping up, and that soil CO2, of course, is dissolved in the soil water to make carbonic acid that then increases the weathering that consumes the carbon.
Productivity in this case means the ability or the amount of CO2 that it has captured.
Yes. It's productivity. It's what we call secondary productivity. So it's a measure of microbial respiration of carbon dioxide. And we can calibrate that from modern soils to actually get the productivity. It's about 1,000, and then it goes up to about 1,500 here. The error bars are pretty large. Did continental drift do anything? No, we have different paleomagnetic measurements. So it wasn't drifting. Atmospheric CO2 didn't really change all that much in this interval, but it'd be nice to have an estimate from up here, which I don't have, because that's when things seem to change. And weathering seems to be a little bit erratic. There's some volcanics down here, which are very fresh. So already this Ellery Creek section is favoring my hypothesis somewhat. However, more is needed, of course. What we see in those Ellery Creek paleosols is the first megascopic fossils. Now, I didn't have a permit to make a big excavation, but here they are. They're weird looking. This one actually looks like an alga to me. That's this one sketched so you can see it better. This one looks like an Ediacaran fossil, but it's probably just a microbial colony of some sort. This one looks a little bit like a lichen. So does this one. This one also looks like certain sorts of Ediacaran frond fossils. And these are interesting. These are trackways. And since they taper, they seem to start here and then widen, and they seem to go for a fairly short distance. The current explanation of these, and we call them myxomatodes or Lamont, is that these are cellular slime molds. I don't know if you know this thing called, they're mycetozoa, this thing called Dictyostelium, which is a whole bunch of free-living amoebae in the soil, and they come together and they form a slug-like thing that's called a grex. Then they migrate a short distance, they make a trail that looks just like this, and then they form a bulb and then a sporangium, and then they disperse. So we're getting the idea that, wow, this is more complicated than the unicellular fossils that we know from the earlier Precambrian. Things are actually ramping up. So this is favorable to my hypothesis too, that biota did it. So the other field area was the Grand Canyon. When I went on a long walk that almost killed me, down into the Tonian, the pre-cryogenian or pre-snowball sequence in the Grand Canyon. Here it is here. It's this section that runs from the creek here up into here. Here's the camp in Nanquib Creek. I measured paleosols here and up through to the top. It's below the flat lying sequence because these are dipping. It's actually at an angular unconformity. And here we are coming down through the Cambrian trilobite beds into the Tapete sandstone on the way to camp at Nanquib Creek. Once again, nice paleosols. Look at that, sharp top, all this massive stuff. Very surprising, really. That's quite a well-developed soil that is 30, 40 centimeters thick. And we have lots of paleosols. Here they are here, not as many as in Ellery Creek, because most of the sequences either marine or lacustrine. The paleosol intervals, which are red paleosols like this, come only at certain intervals. We have a lot of different indicators of what's going on. These biomarkers are very interesting because they're mainly bacterial markers down here and eukaryotic markers up here. So this is an indication that things were getting more complicated, that there were early bacteria on land and in the ocean, and then later on more complicated creatures. We had two kinds of paleosols again. Ones with these nice hard calcite nodules like this one, which we call Sikawa, and then ones with these gypsum rosettes, otherwise known as desert roses. So again, very silty, probably Lursic. Quite nice weathering trends in these paleosols that suggest that there was weathering going on prior to snowball Earth. And once again, there was a transition from gypsic through to calcic with a little bit of alternation. So the soil productivity here prior to the snowball onset was ramping up as well. And here are the bacterial biomarkers, their abundance, and here are the eukaryotic ones. They're ramping up right about there. Weathering does seem to have increased as you go up section, although there's a bit of a reversal. In this section, believe it or not, it does look as if the section was drifting. There was continental drift. It drifted from mid-latitude through to lower latitude. So that supports that idea. Volcanism is a little bit erratic, but it's not really showing that much trend. And in that Sikawa paleosol, I was absolutely thrilled to find a whole bunch of fossils came tumbling out of this thing. Quite remarkable. These are bacterial. This and this. These are tiny things, 20 microns, 10 microns, 20 microns. This one is fungal. It's a fungal bundle or a cord, a fungal cord, and it has offshoots. This one is a conjugating zygospore of a fungus. So we have fungus those eukaryotic biomarkers are suggesting we have fungus, not just cyanobacteria or really early bacterial life forms. This is fungal too, probably some sort of a fungal vesicle, rather like modern mycorrhizae today. And all of these are really quite fascinating. These are amoebozoa. They are cellular, they're testate amoebae. Now, frankly, I was drawn to this whole area because these have been known for quite some time, but they were thought to be marine. I found these in a paleosol, all of them. It's an amoeba-like organism that secretes a shell, and the shell has scales around it. You can see the impression. This is the internal mold of it. Here's another one. Here's the aperture, and this has been filled with calcite. Here's another aperture. These have this kind of cellular look to them. And then finally, we have these sheets of cells. If you look carefully, you can see that there's a double wall there. These are cell walls that are pressed up against one another. These are small fragments, not very big, about 1 millimeter in this particular case for the whole thing, of a multicellular organism that lived in paleosols around about 750 million years ago. Probably lichens, because we can see that they're penetrated by these hyphae. So there are these big cells, which may be photobionts of some sort, and then there are these really fine tubular things which seem to be penetrating them, like the hastorial arrangement that we get in a lichen. So once again, we're getting an indication that this was not just a simple prokaryotic Precambrian set of life forms. Oh, this is weird. I lost my, well, we'll skip over that. Let's now go back in time and look at the whole sweep through the snowball interval. What was it like before snowball? Well, before snowball, these are some fossil soils that I described at 3 billion years ago, but we have very similar assemblages of paleosols going back to 3.7 billion years ago. And they are gypsids. They have these big crystals of gypsum, barite, and this one here, narcolite. These are the sorts of soils that we find today in a Death Valley-like situation, in a saline lake. And the real puzzle has been so much sulfate. This is a sulfate mineral, calcium sulfate, sodium sulfate, in an environment where we know there was hardly any oxygen. How does that happen? Well, I think the answer is we had a lot of these sulfur oxidizing bacteria in the soil. And in this particular set of paleosols, they're preserved in chert. So we have sulfur oxidizers. We have evidence from framboids that there were sulfur reducers. So there's a complete sulfur cycle. The sulfur oxidizers are photosynthetic anaerobic bacteria. So they are actually able to reduce carbon from the atmosphere, carbon dioxide, into reduced carbon compounds to make their bodies. And these spindles, which are quite large really for Archean, this is 3 billion years old now, we think are probably actinobacterial decomposers. We used to call them actinomyces and think they were fungal, but they're not fungal. Fungi are eukaryotes, and actinobacteria are prokaryotes. So back in these days, there was hardly any oxygen. Life was microbial, microscopic, all really quite tiny. And the amount of weathering that could be done under a system like that was relatively limited. As we move forward in time, at 7 billion years ago, the Ellery Creek section that I showed you, we're looking at 2 different levels in the Chua group in the Grand Canyon, we find that things have changed. Something's happened. Something's happened with the production of oxygen. We go past the great oxidation event of 2.4 billion years, and we suddenly see the paleosols are now red or purplish colored, which is a mix of red hematite along with organic matter in the soils. Something has happened, but it's still all microscopic. Now, we can see, oh, that's weird. That's not working either. We can see this transition from the gypsic to the calcic soils in the Atacama Desert. In the lower part of the Atacama Desert, where it's very arid, you only get sulfur bacteria and you only get cyanobacteria. When you start to get the calcids, like these here with the calcite, these are the gypsic soils, these are the calcic soils. Suddenly you get eukaryotes, you get fungi and lichens and other, even a few hardy land plants. And it's that transition, I think, which created the snowball, that evolutionary transition from multicellular eukaryote organism from a previous bacterial assemblage to get the snowball Earth of 720 million years ago. Well, moving right along, land plants didn't actually occur until the Ordovician, the early Ordovician. And this is an assemblage that I found in a karst fissure in Tennessee, I published just a few years ago, of early land plants. There are lichens, these tall lichens. That's called Prototaxides. Here's a demonstration of the haustorial green algae with the hyphae. There are hornworts. There are two different kinds of mosses, and then there are balloonworts, these very strange little things. We still have them all in Oregon, by the way, and my friend David Wagner has pointed them out to me. What happened when land plants came on land? Well, suddenly we had another ice age. At about the late Ordovician, when these early land plants were really starting to spread around, we have the Hernantian ice age, which is best known from the Sahara Desert today. After that, we find lots of millipedes on land. We find paleosols with millipedes. And so it seems that that balanced things out, and that ice age was relatively short-lived. It went away. So my idea is, which I call the Proserpina principle, I'll get to it more, is that when there are big innovations in plants, when plants start to get bulky for the first time, these are non-vascular plants now, they don't have any xylem, then it chills the planet. And when animals get after that biomass, the planet becomes warmer because some of that biomass is being funneled back. Oh, that's unfortunate. Yeah, no, I regret not having this one, but basically the idea is that trees, eventually we had trees. Trees start to come in the middle Devonian. And when the trees came in, they deepened the soil quite remarkably. There's no way I can get that one, huh? Okay. Well, what it shows is little dinky non-vascular plants on this side going into trees on this side, and the rather thin soils, which are calcareous, going to very thick soils with deep, effective root traces that are really effectively pulling down carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. And in fact, the advent of trees not only created a tremendous carbon sink in regular soils, but also for the first time we start to get peat swamps, which take carbon dioxide into coal. And in fact, there were three different soil orders that appeared: histosols, the peat swamp ones, alpha soils, the regular soils, the ultrasols, which are deeply weathered forest soils like we get here in Oregon, and spodosols as well, all at around about this time. And what was the result of that? Well, a great glaciation, which I call the Gondwana glaciation, because it was found in all the Gondwanan countries, in the Permian and then in the Carboniferous. It started in the late Devonian, went through the Carboniferous and into the early Permian. It was found in Antarctica, in New South Wales, Australia, actually throughout Australia, in South Africa and in India, and it was the one that was discovered by Tanit Edgeworth David, who was on that fateful Antarctic trip. After trees evolved, of course, a variety of insects evolved, particularly cockroaches and termites, and that ice age went away when we get a method of actually eating trees. Dinosaurs eventually evolved to eat trees, so we have this Mesozoic greenhouse, which lasted from the Triassic through into the early Tertiary. And so what explains the current ice age that we find ourselves in, the ice age of the last 2.5 million years or so. I think it's the evolution of a completely novel kind of soil called a mollisol. That's what this is here. This shows a time series, and you've probably seen this from other speakers. We've known for a long time that what happened during the Tertiary, starting in the Eocene, going through to the late Miocene, is that animals became more effective at eating coarse material. They became more leggy, that elegant leggy look with the sort of a very, because the vegetation was becoming more open. It was changing from a mallee-like vegetation, a low shrubland, with to open rangelands in which it was more important to escape predators by running rather than hiding or climbing a tree. Plants, on the other hand, have a variety of methods, grasses in particular, of sequestering carbon. They have rhizomes that are buried beneath the ground so that when they're eaten, they're not destroyed. They have sheathing leaves and an intercalary meristem so that when you cut them, they can still keep growing. They have telescope terminal meristem. The meristem is way down in there, so you can eat all of that and they can still make new leaves. And they have these phytoliths, these plant opal, which is like sandpaper to the teeth of horses and makes the response that they were the more continuously growing. It's coevolution. It's a coevolution between grasses and grazers that produced a new kind of soil. And a new kind of soil horizon, the Moloch epipedon, for the first time in the world, 19 million years ago, we get this rich, humic surface horizon of grasslands. The biomass of grasslands is pretty significant too, not quite as significant as trees, but the amount of carbon in these can be 10 weight% to depths of 1 meter or so, whereas the amount of carbon in these is 2 or 3 weight% at most, near the surface only. So you're burying carbon in the soil. Now, this is one of my favorite ideas among farmers, of course, because this is a way to curb the current greenhouse, and is to manage your farm so that you make more of this and less of this. It means no till. It means a whole bunch of different grazing regimes which will build soil carbon, and it deserves government subsidy as well. Of all the desperate talk you hear about global warming, this is the only light at the end of the tunnel, really. About 25% of the world's land area is currently under farm management. And it's just a question of managing it so that we put the carbon back in the soil from which it has been driven by unfortunate agricultural techniques. Here's what it looks like if we're looking at a transect from, say, Chicago through to Denver. In the Eocene, the trees just got smaller and smaller and smaller as you went out from Chicago through to Denver. And this is a situation which still prevails in Australia today. These tiny trees here, 1 and 2 meters tall, are what we call mallee in Australia, in New South Wales in particular, in the Riverina district. Sometime around about the Oligocene, we start to form a grassy cover in this intervening area. It was small, and it was in a relatively low rainfall belt. So this is the wetter part of the transect, Chicago, the dry part of the transect near Chicago, near Denver. By Miocene, we get the first sod grassland. Here's that Moloch epipedon coming in for the first time, very high organic carbon content. And in the Pliocene, the empire of grass, driven by elephants as well as horses and other grazers, has moved out into wetter and wetter climates and much more carbon sequestration, the deep sod that the pioneers found in the Great Plains of North America when they first arrived. Now, this is a co-evolutionary process that produced something really rather magnificent. The horses aren't concerned about climate change, and the grasses aren't concerned about climate change. The horses are concerned about getting something to eat, and the grasses are concerned about avoiding the horses. But the net result is their mutual like is creating a tremendous carbon sink. I actually calculated that, and I can show you that in a little bit, that pulled everything down toward the ice age. This is a long process that was going on for quite some time, creating the first molic epipedon, the first really strong tilt.
Say that, as an example, down in Brazil, we are replacing rainforest with savanna.
Right.
As they cut down the trees and graze more cattle, we are moving from the forests with have thinner soils, less important, but carbon in them, to thicker soils eventually in the grassy areas. Right. So this is the kind of natural response we expect to rising temperatures. So it's both a cause and a response.
Yes, well, the farmers are helping to do it, but yes, there are two things going on. So I've talked so far about the rise of mollisols. The mollisols are replacing aridosols. The grassland soils are replacing the desert soils, and so that is creating a net CO2 drawdown. The forest soils, however, are also pulling down a lot of carbon, and they've been doing so since the Pennsylvanian origin of rainforests. I've seen soils like that in the Pennsylvanian, and we have some of these in Oregon right here. This is the Middle Miocene. It's near the Enchanted Forest on I-5. There's a quarry that shows this rather thick oxisol between two Columbia River salts. It only shows the lower one here, but there's one above. This is quite a remarkable oxisol, because here it is at star, and here's the distribution of modern soils of that sort. So this is what I call a soil carbon dioxide thermostat. Yeah. In trees, yeah. Well, that's really good, especially in our climate, but in the case of a tropical forest, there's virtually no carbon in these oxisols, virtually none. It's very efficiently. So all the carbon you're sequestering is the carbon that's in the trees themselves, and that's pretty significant, but I'll show you some numbers in a bit. It doesn't do the trick. You can really put a lot more carbon in the ground than you can put above it.
And there's a time scale here.
Right. Yes. Well, not so. No. Grassland, you can build 1% of carbon in a grassland soil by good management within a year. To build the same amount of carbon, even in the agroforestry that we have here, will take you about 30 years. So it's quite a bit slower to sequester carbon in forests than it is in a grassland soil. Yeah. Pardon, I didn't quite catch that. Yes. No.
The fungi consume a third of the global.
Oh, yes, quite so. Yes, that's true. Right. Oh, that's really good, because the fungi are mainly in the ground. Remember, all those mycelia are in the ground, and those fungi are consuming and jacking up the soil carbon dioxide. That's what counts, because that's what weathers the minerals, and that's what feeds the other microbes. So there are several components of sequestering carbon in soils that farmers traditionally have overlooked by using fungicides and herbicides. The carbon in the soil is both biomass and also the amount of carbonic acid that can be generated by the productivity. Yes. Yes, it's all important, but in terms of this system that I'm going to explain to you as we go along here, the fungi are part of the system. So there's different components of this. Remember, the fungi were important in bringing on the tonian. the snowball earth. Long time ago, 800 million years ago or so, the fungi start to come in the soils. I demonstrated that. And they were important for building biomass and building soil productivity that chilled the planet then. But then other things came along that ate the fungi, and those were those protists, those amoebozoans, which you also found in the Tonian paleosols. That was the snowball earth glaciation. Then we went through the alternation of the early land plants and the millipedes. Then we got trees and then tree-eating dinosaurs and other things. So we went through another cycle with the evolutionary innovation of trees in the Devonian. And the trees also fed the fungi to increase weathering depth and weathering intensity. So the fungi's days were a long time ago. We had that system. Then we built on it a non-vascular plant system on top of that. And then we have a tree system on top of that. And the most recent one was this grassland system, which is only 19 million years old. So we have these cycles that are building off one another. But I'll get to it. I'll get to it some more. So what fascinates me about that particular paleosol, which is by the Enchanted Forest, it's Middle Miocene, it's between the Columbia River basalts, and it's right here. This ginkgo leaf comes from close to that level, and we've been able to calculate from the stomatal index of ginkgo, and that's another talk, that CO2, this is an error bar, the CO2 was about 1,000 or 600 ppm during the Columbia River basalt eruption. And the Columbia River basalts probably produced that by emitting such a large amount of CO2. It's a big eruption, so you get a lot of CO2. And we find that we also get deep calcic horizons, and we get lots of laterites at around about that level as well. We're pretty sure about that actually, because we know how much CO2 was needed, and we have a whole bunch of these big volcanic eruptions that produced all of these spikes as far as we can tell. And the Columbia River basalt, it's a small one. The really big one was at the Permian Triassic boundary, and there was another big one at the Triassic Jurassic boundary. What's amazing though is that they all come down rather rapidly. How did that happen? That's the problem that I really wanted to address. So you get a big eruption, puts a lot of CO2 into the atmosphere, the whole world gets warmer, and then things have got to move. Things have really got to move a lot. Here's the modern world, and I've just chosen 4 different soil types. The rainforest oxysols in red, they're all tropical in the modern world. I've got the periglacial gelisols in the high mountains of the Andes and in the north and in the central Tibetan plateau. I've got the grassland mollisols in green, and I've got the iridosols in brown. These iridosols, which cover large areas. If we look at the last glacial maximum, the distribution of paleosols, and I have lots of paleosols here, is an extraordinary abundance of gelisols, frozen soils, or ice caps, and an extraordinary abundance of desert soils, but very few oxysols and very few grassland soils. However, if we look at the Middle Miocene, that's what this one is. Look at those oxysols. They're going crazy. They're all through here, all the way up into Oregon, right up in here. They're throughout Central Africa, throughout Europe, throughout India and Southeast Asia and Indonesia, and they cover most of Australia all the way south, even into Tasmania. The oxysols are on the march. Yep. Is there a corresponding change in marine organisms as well, and a reduction in alcohol? Oh yeah, absolutely. So during this Middle Miocene greenhouse spike, you got Turritella came all the way, and Ficus came all the way north to Oregon. Then you don't find it before or after. Yes, I'm not too familiar with the phytoplankton story, but yes, there would be changes in phytoplankton as well. So you get these green tides, which we see in Oregon now. you get an abundance of phytoplankton, which produces ocean anoxia. So you tend to get black shales in the marine environment when you get these greenhouse spikes. The black shales of the Middle Miocene are called the Monterey event, and they're the chief petroleum reservoir of all of California, basically, because of this warmer condition. Tropical mollusks are moving north and south, and briefly, and then the phytoplankton blooms, creating oil reservoirs. Yeah. So the oxasols are on the move when it gets warmer, that Middle Miocene warm spike, and so are the grasslands. What's happening is that the oxasols, which are carbon sequestering active ecosystems, are building in land area, and the grasslands are building in land area. And we can barely find a periglacial paleosol in the Middle Miocene, but even the desert soils now are on the run. We don't get very many of them anywhere. So the area of the carbon sequestering ecosystems is increasing, and the area of the weakly carbon sequestering ecosystems is decreasing. I was able to run some numbers on it. You can look at so this is, oh yeah, it's unfortunate this is cut off, but this is glacial. This is 1980, and this is Middle Miocene out here in terms of their CO2 levels. It's about 600 ppm here, about 280, 180 all the way down here. We can see that as you go from the low carbon dioxide levels to the high, mollisols are increasing and oxasols are increasing, iridosols and gelisols are decreasing. And we can actually calculate the biomass gain. So there's two ways you can put soil out of the atmosphere. You can make stuff, biomass, and the biomass in oxasols and grasslands is actually increasing dramatically. So this is multiplied by the land area occupied by that soil type and by the amount of carbon in biomass typical for that soil type. And the iridosol and gelisol mass is decreasing. It's even, but the biomass gain is not nearly as impressive as the amount in the soil. Mollisols carbon consumed by weathering and oxasol carbon consumed by weathering is off the charts. Iridosols and gelisols are getting less and less. It's a thermostat. So when things get warm, the warm, loving, deeply weathered ecosystems expand and pull it down relatively rapidly. You can run numbers that show that they can do it within 100,000 years, which is just about right, because we have radiometric dates on the basalt above and below that oxasol at the enchanted forest that indicate that that's on all the time there is to actually ramp it up and pull it down, to drive those forest soils all the way north to Vancouver. Now, I don't know if you're fans of James Lovelock and the Gaia hypothesis, and that he had the idea that there was a thermostat, and he called it Daisy World. He didn't know why the world has regulated its temperature so effectively, and he played with the idea of methyl sulfide from algae and other ideas, but that never really panned out. But he had a thought experiment which was accessible to modeling, whereby in a continuously increasing luminosity of the sun, you can maintain the world at a particular level, temperature, if you have a balance of white daisies and black daisies, just two species, because when it gets, because the black daisies will absorb sunlight, they have a low albedo, they will warm the planet. The white daisies reflect it, so they will cool the planet. It's a neat kind of a thermostat, and mathematically it works out really quite nicely. The only problem is, in terms of my data, it's just ass backwards. It doesn't work at all, because the most reflective ecosystems are the gelisols and the iridosols. And if they are actually reflecting things and cooling the planet, it would just keep cooling. What you need is for it to be the other way around. The ones that have a lower albedo are the rainforests and the grasslands. They are actually taking in the sunlight and decreasing it. So the albedo model doesn't work, but I think the carbon sequestration one does. And this is pretty close to my last slide. So the way I see it, Plants cool the planet and animals warm it. That's a very simple-minded approach. This is a log scale, so this is just a second ago. And here we are down in here with the last glacial termination. And there are several of these fluctuations. The thermostat was not like the one you have in your home that keeps things on an even keel. There were perturbations, there were meteorite impacts, there were volcanic eruptions, there were things that threw it off kilter, but always it started to sort of bring things down. And it needed to bring things down over this time scale because the sun was getting brighter anyway. This is a sort of a global thermostat. The biota has acted as a global thermostat. This is one of my favorite diagrams of all time, and it was published by Tyler Volk, which shows this Proserpina principle over a period of just 4 years. So you're probably familiar with the fact that carbon dioxide goes up and down from summer to winter. It just reached a peak of 424 at Mauna Loa yesterday, and it goes up by about 5 parts per million by May, peaking, and then it goes down through the winter. And in the southern hemisphere, it's out of phase, of course, because the seasons are out of phase down there. And the reason for this, of course, is that this is winter. There's a lot of soil respiration going on, but not much plant life. And then spring, spring comes on, and there's all this green stuff, pulls it down until the end of the summer. And then winter again, shed the leaves, up it goes, spring, winter, spring, winter. It's measurable, this effect of life regulating the planet on a yearly basis. Of course, there is a ramp up. It increases even over these 4 years, and it's starting to get alarming. But that's another story. Well, this is my last slide, and don't worry, I'm not going to read it. I'm going to sing it. There was a time when Earth was all frozen and glaciers spread to tropical oceans. Even in tropics, the soils had ice wedges, endless piled up in long wind-blown ridges. The snowball Earth, worst of the ice ages. What was the reason for such a chilling? Was it the continent's tropical drifting? Was it the weatherable, tuffaceous sand, or increased greening of ocean and land? The snowball Earth, worst of the ice ages. From Tony and Paleosols, the stories unspooling, gypsids transition to calcids for cooling. Pond scum was joined by fungi and others, and soil microbiomes consumed greenhouse gases. The snowball Earth, worst of the ice ages. That's it. Thanks. Good questions. Thank you for those.
More questions?
Yeah. Yes. Yes, Milankovitch cycles are very important. They've sort of made the difference between a full glaciation and non-glaciation many times over in the Pleistocene. But here's the rub. It's kind of like the seasonal distribution I showed you, the flying carpet there from winter to summer. The causes of Milankovitch cycles are a sinusoidal wave, because one of them is obliquity. One of them is precession of the equinoxes. One of them is obliquity. One of them is eccentricity of the orbit. And these are all sinusoidal waves. However, the climate record we get from ice cores is far from sinusoidal. It is a sawtooth. As I showed, I think it was the one before this, or two before. Oh, that one.
I was doing this one.
The flying carpet. Oh, yeah, you can. Oh, this one will do, yeah. So what we see in all of these cycles is that it draws down relatively slowly, and then there's a termination. It's not sinusoidal at all. Something is is modulating the sinusoidal pattern. And I think what that is the decline in productivity until there's a break. There's a continual eruption of carbon dioxide, and eventually the system snaps out of the ice age and goes straight up, and then plants work to bring it down. So the initial constraints, it's cued in a wonderful paper in 1966, I think it was. Hayes described the Milankovitch cycles as pacemakers of the ice age. So you know what a pacemaker is? It's not the pacemaker that's pumping your blood. It's just giving a signal, tiny signal. And that tiny signal tweaks the heart to do what it needs to do. I think it's the same with Milankovitch. Milankovitch is important, but it's not driving anything. It's not driving this sawtooth pattern. What's doing that is changes in soil distributions and ecosystem distributions.
And the reason the cycle didn't do much in the past, i.e. before we had ice ages, 7 million years ago, is because the CO2 level was high enough that even when the cycles still had enough greenhouse gas that we didn't start developing ice cap. It was only when we kept the cycling going on, but the CO2 levels dropped low enough in the first cycle to develop good ice caps.
Actually, yeah, I used to subscribe to that view myself some time ago, and it's a reasonable view. It's a defendable one. However, I did a study on the Oligocene paleosols in Central Oregon. I don't know if you saw it, but it showed an obliquity cycles in the Oligocene, and the CO2 level was sort of middling. It wasn't particularly low or particularly high. And in fact, when people look at sequences of rocks, even marine rocks, salt sequences, wherever, we find the Milankovitch cycles throughout the entire rock record, even in banded iron formations in the Archean. These Milankovitch cycles are tweaking productivity in a sense where you get these breaks. In the John Day formation in Turtle Cove, for example, you always have a deep calcic followed by 2 shallow calcic. So that means a woodland soil followed by 2 sagebrush soils, basically. And it's virtually identical to the soils sequence that you get in the Palouse-Loess, which is Pleistocene in Washington and parts of northern Oregon. So these Milankovitch cycles are cueing plant and soil productivity as well. Yeah.
One thing I found particularly perplexing is distribution, gravity distribution,
Right. Right.
That seem to be constrained to like Willamette Valley mostly.
Right. Right.
So the falls are further at all.
Yeah.
And you can call it state, but it is the valley.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, the oxasols were limited to the Willamette Valley because they're limited by rainfall. Now, when you get silver falls, you're stratigraphically higher. So there are inceptisols between flows at Silver Falls. We actually did a project on it once, and those are that's the next flow up from the laterite, bauxite actually, and then you go below that, and then there are more inceptisols. So that was it was a spike basically at 16 million. In Eastern Oregon, where it was always a bit challenged for rainfall, we get alpha sols and oak forests. That's weird. You don't get that in Eastern Oregon now because there was a shortage of water, but it was still warmer and wetter than it was today. And we start to get really strong mollisols out there as well. And we can see this happening now. We can see that this global change is happening. We have, as a noxious weed, apparently laurel is coming into the Willamette Valley. And I think a lot of our exotics that are in greenhouses are going to become naturalized in the Willamette Valley, because the end result is we'll be able to grow bananas and avocados in the Willamette Valley. the way we're going. If we get to 600 like we did in the Miocene and start to develop this oxisol again. But in Eastern Oregon, you can already see in many parts of Eastern Oregon, particularly not the far east, not Malheur and Harney counties, but around Christmas Valley and all the way through the Blue Mountains, you see the sagebrush is now starting to get crowded out by grass. And of course, the juniper's going crazy. Now, sadly, the BLM has the idea that we need to eliminate the spurge laurel, and we need to eliminate the junipers, just drop and leave them, because they have the idea that the ideal is to return this country to 1492. But that was a long time ago. It's never coming back. It's gone. Okay, it's not. We need to encourage plant growth that will actually sequester carbon, and farmers need to do it, and BLM needs to get with the program. Right. 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 Yep. The most prominent one is 16 million years ago. It's between two flows, but it's above the ginkgo and below the Frenchman Springs, and you can trace that actually through most of the Columbia River Gorge. You can trace it all the way north to Vancouver, Washington, where it stops. You can also trace it all the way down through the California Great Valley, in the Eone Formation and Eocene Formation down there. There was another one back in the Eocene. And you can see it really prominently. I just drove through this north of Redding, in those red soils as you go up through past Dunsmuir and up in there. It's a very, very widespread oxisol level. In Australia, it's quite stunning, because in Australia, the Middle Miocene was the last time you got those sorts of oxisols that far south. They now form in Queensland at a place called Weipa in the northern part of Cape York and around Darwin. But in the Middle Miocene, all the way south to Tasmania. Quite remarkable. Yes, yes. The Cascades created a rain barrier, and the rain barrier enabled a wet climate soil like that to actually exist. The tropical oxisols, I did a study on this, they need at least 17 degrees centigrade mean annual temperature, and they need at least 1,500 millimeters of rain. And that works. In a greenhouse period, which we're heading into, everything will get a little wetter and warmer and greener. And unlike the BLM, we shouldn't fight against it. We should work with it. Oh, okay.
I think you sort of are. The questions online, you guys can turn on your mic and ask questions. Other questions?
Great questions. Thanks.
I think I followed most of mollisol. What is that again?
Mollisol is a grassland soil, which has an unusually high organic carbon content. I can explain. The mollisol is a miracle of biological engineering. And it turns out to have been super important for the origin of soil science as a discipline. We've seen a lot of footage of tanks running across mollisols in Ukraine now. These were studied by Russian soil scientists many, many years ago. And it's that dark, they call it a Chernozem, that was the old name for it. It's very high organic carbon, 10% organic carbon throughout the whole depth of that horizon. It was Dokuchev, a Russian soil scientist in 1883, who wrote a monograph pointing out that this was a biological creation. It was not a tough layer. It was not a loose layer. It was a biological creation. If you look at it in detail, it has a head structure that is like rice grains, tiny little clods of soil. Each one is a clay mineral packet usually smectite, that is surrounded by an organic slime. And that organic slime comes from the guts of earthworms. Earthworms and mollisols go together. Earthworms make mollisols. And they also come from the fact that grasses, unlike trees, have adventitious roots which are really thin and spaced at about the interval, so that the exudate from the roots also create this wonderful soil structure. And that soil structure is what makes a mollisol stable. You can actually run a tractor on it. If it wasn't for that soil structure, it would be a vertisol, and whenever it rained, it would just be a morass. There are limits to mollisols, tanks of pushing it, but heavy agricultural equipment can often manage on a good moll. It's an absolute miracle of engineering created by this coevolution of grasses and grazers and earthworms and lots of time.
See questions online. We got 17 people online.